kids, welcome to Stylus Rumble Effects Time thing. Today we're going to be talking about classical effects, and I'm going to do a little bit of an overview. I'm not totally sure how I'm going to approach classical effects yet, like actually doing splash, because they take a long time. I don't know if anyone's interested in watching a time lapse of me actually animating a splash from scratch, but I mean, it could be several hours worth of animating to get a really nice splash that I'm happy with. But let me know if that's actually something you want me to post. I could just do like time lapse with some elevator music or something. If someone will watch it, I'll put it up there. But first and foremost, if you're interested in classical effects at all, or tradigital effects, then you need this book. Ta-da! So this is Elemental Magic by Joseph Gilland, I think that's how you pronounce it. This one's volume 2. There are volume 1 and volume 2 are very similar, so I don't feel like you need both. If you can get your hands on them and kind of look at the two of them together, then you can see the difference. Maybe it's a bigger difference than I remember, because my friend owns the first one and I own the second one. They're both good. Whatever one you can get them. But it goes over, even this cover page, there you go. You can see that it kind of points out the trajectory of some of these splash directions and stuff. It really goes over how the physics of this stuff works, like smoke and fire, like the heat of the fire itself will affect the smoke direction and things of that nature. It talks about different types of splashes. So here we have a bowl splash. And then over here we have a sheet splash. There's tons and tons of stuff in here that will really get you thinking about the right things and even just drawing the right things. This is how I started out before I got my first job as an effects assistant, doing all the dust and all the water rings. But one of the things this book taught me is the way you should think about drawing if you're interested in effects. So starting out, the very first thing you should do is actually like a wavy line. So that's a little wiggly line. So this is a good starter effect, we'll call it. This is the sort of foundational item you need if you're doing fire, because you could build off this like that and then have yourself a little candle flame. And get rid of this middle bit because it looks really weird in our little flame. Alright, but that'll give you the start of this sort of a candle flame effect. It's like the little flickery top. So that's a good one to start with. And the next one you want to think about doing is the flag wave. Those are two really good beginner ones. Just to get you started, let's talk a little bit about splashes. For a beginner splash, you could just do a little bloop like this, and then think about where each of these drops would go. So this drop will go this way, this drop will go that way, and think about the perspective of this. Like if you blew this little guy up, he'd look like this, where he's got little pieces like that, and then one in the back here that actually connects here behind. Maybe it looks like that. And this is the type of drawing that this book encourages, is thinking of this stuff not as an iconic shape, but actually as a form. So water has depth. This thing here, as this wraps around the back, is going to go like this. And we're going to have a little bit of depth there. So this is a good little exercise. Just draw some organic watery type shapes and then try and draw on the surface of the water. Because if you are doing a simple splash like this little guy, you don't have a lot of detail. But once you get into a really big splash, when they have like all this detail, they might have a lot of pieces up here, and these might get even more intricate where they have lots of little drippy bits that are starting to move along, and pieces will break off, but they'll continue moving with the shape of this water. These little drips will. And then you'll get holes in the water like this that will animate up the surface of the water. It'll continue on in the same trajectory as this form does. And you'll also have these edges, so you'll get a dual color thing. This is what a lot of cartoon water looks like. There you go. So we'll have like a darker outside, and then we'll have this white foam at the top. That's the word I'm looking for. Foam. So you'll end up with something like this. And you'll have to follow these things here, these little foam trails, they flow along the same form as the rest of this water. So I've got a little splash rough that I had kicking around. I'll change the colors on it, so I'll make it a little darker so you can see. I like to do the back and the front in 2 different colors so that if I need to turn this down so I can see the front or whatever, that's a little bit easier to do. Right, so this is a fairly, it's I'd say a medium splash. It doesn't have the foam edges following along, but it does have some of these little holes that open up along the surface of the splash wall, and you have to follow that along the path as it goes. And there's another one here. And then here, once it hits the surface of the water, all this breakup, that's the same thing. You have to have like this tear in the water flow along the surface of the water itself. So perspective is hugely important for special effects. I can't emphasize enough how important perspective is, and not just here, I'll play that, and not just linear perspective or like orthographic perspective or like the really mathematical stuff, but as well as that, you want to think of intuitive perspective is kind of what I call it. I'm not sure exactly what these are called. Without it, you're going to be stuck doing iconic effects, which is fine. The really flashy style stuff, where you have an explosion that just looks like a bunch of like pointy stuff like this. Like if that's what you're going for, that's what you want your explosion to look like. And there you go, you're done. And there you go, you've got an explosion. I mean that's an explosion. That's fine if that's what you're going for. But if you want to do a big explosion where you have lots of different pieces coming out in different directions like this, and you have big plumes of smoke that are coming out in these directions, so coming towards the camera, going up away from the camera, and you have pieces of debris that are getting shot out, like rocks and stuff. So if you want something more like this, and you want to be able to clean this thing up, and you want to be able to add tone so that your forms start to read, then you need to really study your perspective and your form drawing. I don't know what that's called. If someone knows what that type of perspective is called, by all means let me know. Dust and stuff coming out from behind it. You have something going. You can even have that going back. That way it's coming out from behind the cloud. Something a little bit more like this, you're not going to be able to, like, you know, there's a little bit of a gap between some like big giant smoke explosion with rocks flying out everywhere. Even just little poofs. So if you have this sort of thing where someone's just like scuffed up their boot or something, say their foot is here and he's taken off. So say he shoots his foot back like this and just scoots up some dust, little just like run dust, you know, do something like that. Then if you have this form drawing, this underlying knowledge, it's much easier to animate this stuff going in a specific direction. So, you know, your initial trajectory is going this way where it's going to be kicked up. So these shapes are going to be going in this sort of direction, like that. So on your next frame, because you know where your dust is planning to go, and you know the general form of your dust. So here you've got a little sphere, some little spheres like that kind of taper off into a wedge. And up here you've got a big sphere. And here you've got, right, so you know exactly what type of forms you're going for. Then you can really easily animate that. Because you're animating, instead of animating amorphous shapes, just like random blobs, because that's one thing that character animators have told me, that they just, when they're animating, they're trying to animate effects, they just feel like they're animating a bunch of nonsense. Like there's just too much pieces going everywhere and it feels a little bit chaotic at times. But if you are really familiar with the form of the stuff you're drawing, so here I'm just thinking about all these spheres being kicked up, you can have some license to play around with the shape a little bit and get some of these wedgy cutout bits. So that makes it much easier to keep track of all this stuff, these little poofy bits. as it dissipates, it gets a little easier. You don't have to keep doing it as you go along. You can kind of get a little bit simpler and break it up into pieces. So there are a couple different ways to dissipate dust. I tend to do sort of an old-fashioned way where it breaks up into little circles. There's also more of this wedge. The smoke dissipates more like this, where it's almost eaten from this direction that it's coming from. That's another way to dissipate your dust. This one I find is a little bit more dynamic. So if you're doing an action scene, then having your dust get chewed away like this might feel a little bit more energetic. So there in like 2 or 3 minutes, I've got a pretty okay poof here. Going the poof method, where you have a circle that kind of breaks up. The popcorn method, they call it, when your poof kind of breaks up like this into little pieces. That's more of an old-timey way. I find it's kind of more of a cutesy one. So if you're doing a girly show, or it's a cute action that makes a poof, like if a little baby falls on his butt, you need a little poof, then you don't want like a real dynamic action man poof. You want a little like poof, like a cute poof. Then probably go the popcorn method. And if you need something a little more dynamic, sort of a bro poof, then maybe go like the chew out method, where if you're thinking about the mechanics of it, the outside edge here is just going slower than the inside edge. So you can see the gaps between here and here is pretty big, and the gap up here is getting quite small. So it's losing its velocity here, but still keeping a lot of it down here. And it just chews out the bottom of the effect. It's popcorn and the poof chew. And because we have these forms now, going in and adding the shadows is going to be very simple, because you know what a sphere is, and if you know how to draw the form around the sphere, like if you can draw a beach ball like this and you're trying to do highlighting, well, you just draw a crescent and then you can just fill it in. Like, so if you can draw the form of a ball, you can shade a ball, especially with cartoon shading. There's no bounce light here. All right, so now you've got yourself a little shaded poof. Put that on half speed. Poof. Moral of this story is to practice this sort of form drawing, because like everything, if you have a bunch of rocks like this, sort of a flat rock, and then another one like this, and another one, I'll draw a little rock surface thing. If you have this and you have water coming down here, then you know that the water is going to hit here. And first we're going to have some splash, so we can give that some reasonable directions. If the water is coming this way, then the splash is mostly going to go in this direction. And you get a little bit of bounce back. But we'll say for now it's coming straight down. And it's hitting here. We're getting some splash off, but then most of the water is going to be running down this surface here. Let me switch colors. So our water is coming down in a sheet, and it's going to run over this surface here. So some of it might run down here, and most of it's going to run down this side, and then come out, and then we're going to have pieces break off. And it'll pool around here, and then it'll find the path of least resistance to the ground. So some of it might go this way. And it'll pool again. So just being able to draw the surface of this rock. Well, first of all, if you want to be a layout artist or background designer, so this sort of stuff is invaluable. That's really the moral of this episode. Being able to do like a wireframe over the surface of anything that you're drawing is just massively important, massively helpful. And it's going to be the difference between this and this, or getting some of these bowl shapes, different splash shapes. Sometimes the splash goes off to the side like this, and there might be a pile of stuff in the back as well. So you'll have like a double-sided splash. And this is useful for just goo. So if you just have goo, like a heap of goo here, and it's dripping down over the sides, And then once it hits the ground, you have to think about how that goop is going to start folding in over itself. You have all sorts of like goop like this. In one show, I had to do hippo mucus. Hippos are covered in mucus. Character's hand was here, and then I had to stretch the goo along the surface of these two, like between the hippo's butt and the character's hand. Oh, I love working on shows like this. So you have to just be able to have the goo connecting to the surface of this character's hand here, and then also have the goo connecting to the hippo's butt. The best thing about effects is you never know what you're going to do. I've done poop, I've done slime or hippo mucus. That's been pretty sweet. I did like water course, dust, lightning effects, magic effects, coming up with like cool stuff. I did one show where this character had these like magic spheres. They had smoke, sort of like goopy smoke like this trailing off, and I had pieces of it break off and just kind of like trail off of the like smoky goop orb. It got changed to a different thing, but it was really fun to make and I enjoyed it. But the designers wanted something less creepy, I guess. Yeah, but you never know what you're going to draw. So this type of drawing is 100% essential. So that's the basics of special effects. If you want to know the basics, it's learn to draw like this. Learn to understand the form, practice your perspective, draw a lot of things. This guy, he recommends drawing stuff like tree stumps, actually looking at, of course, water features and stuff like that. Because we live in the future, there's tons of slow motion splashes and balloon pops and all kinds of fun stuff on YouTube if you just want to practice drawing these shapes. Because that's a big part of it, is just studying how to draw these types of forms and shapes and things that are not concrete characters, because that's usually where people get tripped up. Because with a character, you know what it's supposed to look like, you know where the pieces are supposed to be, but I mean, every day is different with effects, and that's why it's awesome. So hopefully I can edit this into something useful. I'm going to think about how I'm actually going to approach doing different classical effects. Effects take a long time. Like this splash that I have here, dude, this could easily take like 3 or 4 hours. So I'm not sure if you actually want to see like a time-lapse version of me creating something like this. If that's something people would watch, I will post it. Let me know. I'll put some elevator music or something in the background. But it is a very timely process. So I'm going to think about the best way to approach it. I might start with poofs. I can do poofs pretty quick now because of all the poofs I did as a junior. So many. They called me Dusty at that studio. That's super. Alright, but that's it for now. I will work on a plan to tackle this effect thing. So stay tuned for that. I'm going to break up the effects with character animation as well, kind of like jump back and forth. And if there's any more rigging stuff you want specifically, please let me know about that. Of course, anything. Leave a comment down below with any questions or comments or suggestions. Like, share, subscribe, all those things internet people ask you to do, and I will see you in the next video.